This is Misti Green, and you're listening to the I Lead Misty Blue podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice. After releasing Whole People Make Performers Uncomfortable, I kept coming back to one thought. Actually, maybe it wasn't even a thought. Maybe it was more of a realization. One of those realizations that sort of just kind of sneaks up on you when you're doing something mundane or procedural, when you're simply in the moments of life. This realization was simple. Maybe the biggest plot twist of my life is that God has never asked me nor expected me to become someone else. People did. People have spent years telling me how I should lead, how I should act, how I should communicate, how I should show up, how much grace I should extend, how direct is too direct, how strong is too strong, and how much of myself I should soften to make other people feel more comfortable. But when I look back over my life, I don't see God asking me to become someone else. I see people asking me to become someone they were more comfortable with. And those are not the same thing. The very things people often struggled with were the same things that God was using at every turn in my life. My instincts, my discipline, my willingness to ask hard questions, my ability to see patterns in my voice, my capacity, my motivation, my grit. The plot twist wasn't discovering who God wanted me to become. The plot twist was realizing that God already knew who He created me to be. And maybe that's where some of my thoughts about faith have really evolved over the years. At this point in my life, I do not care nearly as much about being known as a Christian as I do about being known as a follower or a disciple of Jesus. Not because I'm distancing myself from Christianity and not because I'm rejecting the faith. It's quite the opposite. It's because I care deeply about the teachings of Jesus. I care about how He treated people and about how He loved people. I care about how He challenged people. I care about how He lived and what He modeled. And when I read the Bible, I don't see Jesus asking people to stop being human. I see Him meeting people in their humanity. I see Him meeting the widow. I see Him meeting the sick, the grieving, the doubter. I see Him bowing down with the outcast and the weary, the person carrying shame. I see Him meeting the person carrying conviction right where they are, and the person willing to come honestly. What I don't see is Jesus asking people to perform holiness. I don't see Him collecting polished people. I see Him transforming and loving real people. And maybe that's the part of what I've wrestled with. I have seen a lot of church. After all, I'm a preacher's daughter. And what I've observed for most of my life is that sometimes the loudest voices speaking on behalf of faith forget that they are human too, or what it is to be human. They present certainty where there really should be humility. They often preach perfection through the lens of conviction when they should simply preach through the lens of honesty. They render judgment from the pulpit where there should be compassion. And Sundays can become full of performance when they were always meant to be about drawing people to Christ and relationships. Now, before somebody hears that and gets defensive, that's not a criticism of faith. It's actually the opposite. It's a reminder that discipleship was never supposed to erase our humanity. And maybe that's why I keep coming back to the same idea from the last episode. Human beings were never meant to be one dimensional. They were not meant to be simply and only just leaders or mothers or fathers. They were not meant to only be pastors. They were not meant to only be Christians, not just disciples. None of us, because being a disciple of Jesus doesn't erase our humanity. If anything, it should make us more aware of it, more aware of our need for grace and for forgiveness, more aware of our need to operate in humility, more aware of our need for God. And maybe that's the biggest plot twist of all. God didn't ask me to become someone else. He asked me to simply follow him, not as a performance and not as a persona, not as a carefully curated version of myself, but as a woman he already knew when he called me to be that person in the first place before I breathed my first breath. And maybe that's why I find myself thinking so much about the next generation, because this next generation is full of thinkers. It's full of people willing to ask the hard questions. They're willing to challenge systems. They're willing to challenge assumptions, traditions, and beliefs. They're willing to ask why and how. And honestly, I'm here for it. I don't find that threatening. I find it refreshing. If we keep presenting Jesus as someone who rejected humanity instead of someone who stepped right into the middle of it, we're going to continue pushing people farther and farther away from Christ. If we keep presenting faith through our own preferences, through our own political beliefs, through our own denominations, our own personal convictions, our cultural lenses, people will continue to struggle to see Jesus in the midst of all that noise. And sometimes I sit back and wonder, what is even happening here? Because when I read the Bible, I don't see Jesus spending his life building these isolated and segregated tribes. I don't see him spending his life protecting an image. I don't see him spending his life creating the insiders and the outsiders, the us and the them. What I see is a man walking in love again and again and again. I see his love for people, his love for the broken and weary, his love for the outcast, his love for the sick, the betrayed, the hurting, his love and inclusion of the overlooked, the misunderstood. See, that was his ministry. That was his mission, and that was his model. Yes, there were moments he spoke with conviction. There were moments he challenged systems. There were moments he overturned tables. There were moments he confronted hypocrisy. There were moments he stood between a hurting person and a crowd that wanted to throw stones. But even then, it was always rooted in love. Love for people and truth, love for freedom, love for what was right. The more I study Jesus, the more I realize his compassion and his conviction were never competing with each other. They worked simultaneously. They worked in tandem. They worked together. And maybe that's another plot twist, that the Jesus I see in scripture wasn't asking people to become less human. He was showing them how to live more fully alive and disciplined, more aligned, more fully connected to God and to one another. And maybe that's the disciple of Jesus I want to be. Not the loudest voice in the room and not the most polished, not the most performative, and not the person with all the answers. I don't have them. Just a woman trying to walk in love, extend grace, tell the truth remain teachable, and also remain human. I want to follow the example of Christ as faithfully as I can. This is Misty Green. Thank you for pulling up a chair and spending a little time with me today. Until next time, keep choosing impact over applause and purpose over podium. And remember, the God who called you never asked you to become somebody else.